Welcome back to Finding Perfect Property, Diary of a Buying Agent. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Randle Siddeley, a visionary landscape architect and founder of a renowned design business bearing his name. With a career spanning over 4 decades, Randle has left an indelible mark on the world of landscape architecture, crafting breathtaking gardens and installations for esteemed private clients and iconic public spaces. In this episode, we're going to explore the evolution of his work, the enduring passion that drives him, and the influential figures who have shaped his extraordinary body of work. Randle, thank you so much for coming to Blackbrick today and agreeing to be a guest on my podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Only too delighted to be here.
I would love to start, Randle, by asking if you could take us back to the early days of your design career, because it's been a phenomenal career that you've had. What led you into this business and then to establish your own landscape architecture, construction and maintenance company? What was your journey?
I think the journey needs to go back to when in my childhood. I was a chronic dyslexic, so schools were a difficulty for me to understand and for them to understand me, more the latter. So I spent a great deal of time during the holidays pootering around in the garden, partly due to the fact that I was somewhat more in control of what I was doing and knowing that I could do something, as opposed to being told at the time when I was at school that I was stupid and that I would achieve nothing in life, which was totally the opposite of what you should be told, especially as my parents were paying a considerable amount of money to send me to a specialist school that was supposed to be able to deal with dyslexic. So I do, devote a lot of my time, and especially today, to encouraging people who are inflicted with this problem, dyslexia, which is very curable, because my eldest son had dyslexia, and now today you wouldn't even know he would had any remote difficulties with it. So that being said, being that it was difficult for me to go and work for anybody because of my dyslexia, because of the lack of being able to spell and being able to sort of do the kind of due diligence, take notes and all these other things. I'd sort of done college. I'd been to Western College of Furniture for Restoration, which was interesting and probably not the right business to be in any longer, because brown furniture is very passé. But then my father was a very famous interior designer, and I had always ideas that I'd go and take over his business. So I then did London College of Furniture, and they they understood that I was coming at a completely different direction. The style of design my father was doing at that moment in time was very affluential. To them, there were very few people, if anybody in the world, that could afford the kind of style of design my father was doing. But that was all at the same time as the likes of David Hicks. And I see that, you have a best of in the property world, Terence Conran, and a number of highly influential people in that moment in time. And there were a handful, probably, of those people. And I always felt that design, I was born and bred with, saw it every day, heard about it every day. So interior designing was the obvious thing to go into. Because, believe it or not, some 48 years ago, most people garden in London, backyard, they'd probably bring their gardener up to the country or find somebody to come and, sweep up a few leaves. But nobody had any sort of aspirations, ideas, or doing anything in their garden just to look at it as a green space to allow the dog to go and run around in. So I then, having left college, then went to work for my father for a period of time. And my father was always said, listen, you're going to come to work for me. Just realise you are going to be the first in the office. You are going to be the last in the office. You are going to have the shortest lunch breaks because, don't want you letting me down. And also, you're going to get the most shit jobs because you're going to have to learn from the bottom up. So I recollect I was there sort of probably about 18 months. And he had a client who had 2 properties, one in the Boltons and one in Addison Crescent. And he had somebody design the gardens. And I said to my father, okay, I'd be interested in actually designing these gardens. So he said, fine. Thinking, yes, there's a possibility, because he knows that I love gardening, and I used to do gardening most weekends when I was in the country or during holiday times, because, you know, being dyslexic, you're sort of slightly cut off from lots of people. You don't know how the confidence to be able to communicate. So I then, at the age of 21, literally started up my own business. And after the first year, I went to go and see my bank manager, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, Randle," he said, "I can see you can make money," but I said, "How long are you going to keep the hobby up for?" I said, "No, Alan," I said, "this is the future." And very few people, you know, at that moment in time thought, you know, there's money to be made out of landscaping. So then, you know, kicked off with Addison Crescent with the Boltons, and I designed, and I sort of had ideas, and I had some people that helped me. You know, I needed to rely on people. I'd previously done some work with a company called Poolbrook and Gould, which was probably one of the best known florists in London. So I had a sort of understanding, but I think it's all these things is what I had, fortunately, was the creative gene, and due to, again, my dyslexia, I had compensated in having a very good photographic memory, which is critical. And you know, I can go into a space and I can recognise a space. I can recognise it. I come back and I remember every single nook and cranny. The one thing people hate me is walking on the site and I spot things that nobody else has spotted. And I said, you know, what's happening here? And people look at it and think, oh, okay. Well, and so anyway, I'm very critical to everything. I have a very critical eye that picks up things. So, you know, that's what drove me into what I started then, which was, you know, at its infancy. And there were only literally a handful of people doing it. And, you know, I effectively, as I call myself, as, you know, albeit I have a team of people behind me, but, you know, my training is myself. I've trained myself. Yeah. And here we are, you know, 47 years still doing it. Amazing
story. And your dyslexic background resonates with me, because my youngest daughter is dyslexic, and I mean, you're absolutely right. In this day and age now, it gets recognised, and there's things that can be done to really, you know, make sure that they are just like everybody else.
And what's more, where their weaknesses are, there are plenty of areas where they have very great strength, and it's being able to understand the strength and always work on those weaknesses and be able to give them balance.
And I think dyslexia now is, you know, people like Richard Branson having raised so much awareness, also, you know, seeing it as a superpower rather than a weakness, because I think, you know, quite possibly, had you not been dyslexic, you may not be, you know, such a successful landscape gardener.
Who knows? Yes. God,
but I love that journey. I think it's brilliant, and, you know, and how, I mean, obviously those are two fantastic addresses to get started with.
Yeah, they weren't too bad. They weren't too bad addresses, but I mean, they were kind of things, you know, if I got them wrong, then I was big time, you know, big time mistake.
But that's a great
as a great friend of mine or client said to me, he said, Randle, he said, you know, when you finish the garden, if it looks amazing, I'm going to tell everybody that, you know, it's my idea.
Yeah.
I said, if it looks shit, I'm going to tell them it's you designed the garden, and that's why. So I always love that paradox, you know, sort of people, you know, saying, oh yeah, it's all my ideas.
It's a great backstory. Thank you for sharing it. Obviously, you've been in business a very long time, and, you know, different trends come and go. Has your approach to design evolved since the early years?
Definitely. As a kid, I used to plant marigolds, because you can't kill a marigold or a nasturtium. They just grow wild, and yes, my color palette for yellows or oranges is slightly diminished. But no, I mean, you know, the whole journey throughout life has been a learning one. I mean, the whole period you're running a business. I mean, you know, the pitfalls and everything else. But I always say that the things that sort of the evolution of the things that have changed in our industry, you know, for instance, people appreciate that, you know, everything is colour. There was a time, I don't want to make myself sound too old, that the house and gardens of this day and age didn't really exist in the element that they do, with everything being in colour. So we made a huge leap when suddenly everybody said, oh, I like that, and they do tear something out and say, I like this, and then it all became started, which is very important. They all started to form more of an opinion of their likes and dislikes. And things like lighting in gardens. I mean, people think, light, and you'd have a really ugly par 38 light bulb that, you could see from a very long distance. But I always say, see the light, but not the source.
Yeah.
And this has all changed. You have the likes of John Cullen, Sally Story, people or John Cullen, who's the original person, whose evolution, changed the whole aspect of what we do in lighting. And as in printing, as CGI, everybody sort of is slightly worried about, where are we going in this modern age, and technology and everything. You have to embrace it, because it's right like me in the early days when I said drawing boards. Yeah, I keep my drawing board, and it was sort of like, it was because I grew up on a drawing board. I literally worked on a drawing board. I used to use a razor blade to go and remove the marks. So now you've got a computer, you don't need a razor blade, you go delete.
Yeah.
So that's changed a lot in what we do. I mean, when I first started, I used to do sort of quite small gardens, albeit, quite nice gardens where they, in the addresses they were. And then, when I wanted to sort of develop and doing bigger gardens, I remember one person saying, "But Randle, you haven't done any big gardens." And I thought, interesting. So I can do small gardens, but you think I can't do big gardens. So you've just got a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, with a bigger garden, you've got a greater picture. You've definitely got a bigger canvas.
Yeah.
I mean, mine is, painting a canvas. It's putting all the ideas on the canvas. I mean, the most important thing anyone should ever do, whatever size garden, is don't look at one corner, look at the overall garden, and then make a plan as to what you ideally want in that garden.
Yeah.
Don't overclutter it. As I always say, less is more.
Yeah.
But you must think about the whole space and how you're going to use it, and whether you want to sit outside your French doors or directly outside, or you want to sit in the further part of the garden. The only thing is, everybody says, "Oh, well, I've got to carry everything there." And I said, "Well, yes, but you have to carry, but you have to make an effort to enjoy your garden.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily it has to be outside the French doors, because sometimes there's benefits to sitting in maybe in the left-hand corner or the right-hand corner, because you're looking over borrowed views, which again, we live in a city, but there are places where you get borrowed views. So it's really thinking about the whole element of how you nowadays the spaces that from what you do or don't do in gardens. I mean, there's a whole recipe of them, but the first one I always say, think what you want ideally to have. Think of colours, think of structure, because a garden is like your rooms. My father was always saying, that gardens are an extension of your sitting room, and it can be further extension depending on how big the garden is. You can have further wings and other areas that you discover.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to see it all in one go.
Yeah.
So those are really important elements that you need to think about.
Yeah, I love how you've described it being like a canvas.
But I think
like an artist.
one of the greatest things that is we're in this, I call it the big wheel, the wheel that is constantly turning around, which is the wheel of evolution from mankind, and everything that goes around in a circle. And it's a conversation I had with Terence Conran many years ago, and we were talking about how he'd be successful. How do we manage to keep ahead of the game? And the only way you keep ahead of the game is you take your big cog that's constantly turning on, and you take out old cogs and put new cogs in.
Yeah.
And those the new cogs are the new ideas. So the evolution is always going on, but you're adding little elements to it, and so is everybody else. So the whole thing becomes a big melting pot, albeit the wheel going around, of ideas. And seeing, I have a great deal of respect for my own profession, and sometimes you see some great things and you try to say, I don't really want to go copying it, but the whole thing is, I get people who do things, designs, and want to sort of reproduce them.
Yeah.
Hopefully in their own style, which is a compliment. So these are all, I mean, if you don't learn from your peers or from the other young kids coming up, it's like doing the Chelsea Flower Show. I mean, I'm always eager to see who's doing what and thinking how they got there and talking it through with them.
Yeah.
So, it's an important thing to be learning all the time.
Yeah, I think that is very, very good advice. Do you think you have your own style? Would you say you have your own style? Do you think that it's possible for people to sort of think, that's a Randle Siddeley garden?
I try to avoid that because no client is ever the same. No property or garden shape, is never going to be quite the same. And the clients, I treat them as like, they all have a completely different DNA.
Yeah.
So they're bound to have a different likes and dislikes, be it colour, be it the kind of things they want in the garden. So I always encourage the client to feed me with as much information as possible. Because I say to them, ultimately, I'm designing your garden, but you are going to take ownership of it in the end. It's a combination of my ideas and your ideas that's going to get you to where you want to be. So consequently, I don't suddenly say, I've got to have this because I have it in all my gardens and it's a brand and, it's going to make your garden, it's done by such and such and such. No. So I try to avoid it. Sometimes there's a few things that could be a bit, not repetitive, but I've seen it, done it before, and I think, you're right, I did that, and I did it well. It's time to do a slightly bigger one. So I think it's like water features. Yeah. I work with a great guy called Andrew Ewing. He is an inspiration to us in the water world of technical, coming up with creativity and new ways of doing it. As much as I love Andrew, sometimes his ideas take a very long time to come to fruition. Yeah. But, that's the point of it. An artist doesn't, yes, he might suddenly go and paint the canvas all in one moment, but more often than not, he'll paint some of it, go away, think about it, come back. So when I design a garden, I'm always, reflecting on it. I could possibly come back to the office and just do it there and then. But actually, I like to go away and think about it because there won't be a moment when suddenly I think, that's it. I know exactly what I'm doing now. So it's not, it's clients, I say, all their ideas, we're putting all our ideas in a mixing bowl. Yeah. The ideas that we all like. Yeah. And then we're going to make the special recipe, menu. And
how long does that process take? Just talk me through. You meet a client, you see their space. How long does the journey, the process with the client through to meeting them and then finished garden?
Finished? Oh.
On average.
On average. Oh, there's no... I suppose, you meet the client and, you could be developing the garden over sort of, 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
The design. And then, you say, right, well, come January, we're going to start. Yeah. And then you say, well, the work's going to take 3 to 4 months to complete for a normal small, town garden. But we got one project that we bought a tree for 5 years ago, which was a Magnolia grandiflora. And we bought it because we wanted something that was 10 metres tall. Yeah. This tree has now grown to about 13 metres. Wow. We've had to prune it back, but the project sort of moved on and certain changes, and suddenly the client said, actually, we want to do a bit more, and so it's gone on and on. So, that garden's we've taken 5 years to complete. Or, for instance, we do some commercial projects. Yeah. The Lots Road Power Station development, which is finally almost come to its the finite end. Yeah. I started on that probably about 24 years ago.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah.
At the beginning of it, and it will be the longest project I've ever been on, and probably in many people's books likewise that they're never normally happen. But the big countryside properties, they can take a couple of years, 2.5 years. One that I finished a few years ago, which I call River Dance, which is right on the Thames, next to Cliveden, 27 acres. Not that I did all of it, but that was definitely 2.5 years, and I was very much personally involved in the project because the client said to me, Randle said, if you're going to work with me, I want you here 2 days a week. Yeah. I don't want you flying off from one end of the world to the other, which I was doing pre-COVID.
Yeah. I suppose it's difficult when you've got your name on the door of the business. Clients, they want Randle. How do you manage that?
Well, there was one instance where somebody thought there was a Mr. Randle and a Mr. Siddeley, which I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. No, the most important thing to me is that, it's got Randle Siddeley, and people know us for the reputation and what we've achieved in the 4 decades of being working in it. But ultimately, it's not just about me. I mean, yes, it carries my name, but as I say, my team are my orchestra. I'm the person that carries the baton, and hopefully we're all tuned. So when I decide that I'm going to start saying, right, this is the way we're going to do it, that's it. But I'm now, as far as I see it, that I've had a very good run for for all the work I've done. I want the business to carry on. I want my team to inherit the whole business, because it's like, why spend all this energy and gone through all the ups and downs and the turbulence I've been through in running business, only to suddenly say, oh, well, I'll let it go.
Yeah.
So what's going on now is, I'm bringing key people into the business to run it. So it means I can do other things, have a few little other interests outside gardening, which are beginning to sort of get me quite excited. But I mean, I always be there to support the business.
Yes.
I mean, I get a lot of the work in,
Yeah.
and I love that bit of it.
Yeah.
I love to be able to talk and explain to people what we're doing, and then I have the sort of ideas that come to me. More recently, my mother passed away in July, and she has a garden in central London, and people used to comment and say, Jacqueline, my mother, how is it your garden never really looks that exciting? There's only a few times in the year that it's in bloom, like an hour with the rhododendron and the camellia. And she said, your son's, he's in the business. And I always said to my mother, I said, listen, the thing is, what I say is taking ownership.
Yeah.
And whilst I'm not there, I can't take ownership, and I'm not going to burden you with, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and the whole idea. So probably a bit selfish of me, but I just know about having ownership of a garden. And this, believe it or not, I mean, when I had young kids growing up, I had a garden, but they used to kick the hell out of a football. 2 boys, back garden, nothing's going to survive. So I've now had the opportunity. So there's quite a nice sized garden there. It's just off a place called Lexham Walk, and we have a walkway, and I've literally put a lot of planting into the walkway too, so people have a much gentle, enjoyable journey. It's also to try and slow the cyclists down, which I'm a cyclist. I came here today on bicycle. So try to encourage them to slow down and not use it as a racetrack, so they're going up the ramp on the other side. But the garden I've taken, sort of like, being that it was built 50 years ago by my father, and I don't know who designed it at that moment in time, but I would say the design gives me plenty of opportunity to do different things with it.
Yeah.
So I've taken out quite a lot of what was paved areas. I've brought in where the paved area on the upper level, I put in a whole. I mean, it's no bigger. The area I'm talking about is no bigger than this room, but I put in all wildflower, a wildflower turf, ready grown. Boom. I've then done plugs into it so I can get some other interesting plant wildflowers growing, and then I've sort of stripped away paving that went straight up to walls. I mean, why does the paving go straight up to wall? It's all too hard. And I've changed the whole sort of emphasis of soften, no wall, try to avoid seeing the walls, and everything sort of is more of a graceful journey going up into the garden.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's going to be the first time I actually say, hey, I've got a garden. Everybody come and have a look at it, which we're going to do over the week of Chelsea Flower Show.
Nice. That sounds lovely.
So that to me is something, and I got lots of other things I'm going to be doing with it. We're doing a Kashmir caveman. I don't know if everybody's seen The Gentleman, Guy Ritchie's movie. We're putting Kashmir caveman into the lower part of the garden. So that's exciting. So it's lots of other things. And also, if I was going to do the whole garden, because sadly I'm going to have to sell the property because of a few problems that you have when you die, and you have death duties and all these other things that come to haunt you. But what I'm doing is, if I was going to do this, who would I use, and what type of stone would I put? What type of planters would I have? What piece of sculpture would I have? What kind of garden furniture would I have? So I'm doing a sort of a makeover, albeit one of my, what would I dream to have.
Yes.
But at the same time, I've done all the planting, so somebody's going to inherit a really nicely planted garden as and when.
Yeah.
But so it is that generating ideas, because marketing, media,
Yes.
is really critical.
Yeah.
Our Instagram, and all of that feeding that information.
Yeah.
Like today, our conversation is all about telling people
Yeah.
what and how and all the things not to do.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
sorry, I'm probably being rather long-winded in explaining what I'm doing.
No.
What I'm doing at the moment.
It's fair. It's interesting to hear about your projects. I wanted to ask you another question, which is really about property valuations, the importance of having a great garden, and how that impacts how easily a property sells, or the value of the property.
I'm hopefully going to do that with my garden.
Exactly.
We're going to suddenly go and say, I've got to have this property. It's been always a very important.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always said to anybody, oh, well, you can add probably another 5-10% to the bottom line, your price. And people, I mean, the Knight Franks and lots of other property companies I've worked with know this.
Yeah.
I mean, they engage with me and say, Randle, can you help us? We've got a particularly difficult sort of site where you're overlooked, or not necessarily looked, where the levels are all at different level. Can you come up with some ideas that we can then show the end purchaser what is the potential that they could do with their garden?
Yeah.
But it is a big investment.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, it's like everything. A house, the first thing is when you walk in a house, do you have planters outside? If you're going to have planters, have some really nice, spectacular planters.
Yeah.
It's the wow factor.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And again, I go back to that thing is don't overfill it. It's like a room, in the house that I inherited, I have been decluttering it for the last 3-4 months. And suddenly you look at a bit and they've got a beautiful picture, and I say, God, that picture looks so much more beautiful now, because there is no other picture around it.
Yes.
Because it's an important picture.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be a picture, it doesn't have to be cost a fortune, but it's a picture you really like.
Yeah.
Don't clutter your walls. If it's, one of your best pictures, then it should stand alone.
Yeah.
So I say that about everything, furnishings in rooms and knickknacks and lots
Less
of things.
is more.
You put on tables and things, which you all like, but I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, choose the best bits and and don't go for storing things. Yeah. Storing is the most profitable organisation for the storage companies, and the most expensive outgoing that you can possibly have.
I'm sure you're right. Over the years, you must have done some incredible and seen some incredible properties and worked on some incredible spaces. Is there one particular project, it could be residential or commercial, that stands out for you as a favourite?
I mean, I think, as talking in commercial, Wembley Arena, which everybody will know, I mean, that in itself was complete, rejuvenation of the whole of Wembley Stadium and the arena. The approach to the arena was what is now the back door, and the front door is now where it should be, which is in the square. And we were tasked with doing all the landscaping, albeit not a lot of soft landscaping. There were some quite mature trees that went in, but it was the choice of materials that we were tasked to try and find something that was affordable, but we wanted something that's going to stand the test of time. And when you've got hundreds of thousands of people coming through, you've got to start thinking, you're going for a reconstituted stone. And then I sort of said, guys, I said, at that moment in time, importing from China was very inexpensive. So I went over to Beijing, and I went to a few quarries just to make sure that everything was done ethically and that there was no sort of, anything undesirable going on. And we imported probably 70% of the stone for the paving area around the sort of water feature and the main arena area. All granite stone. Yeah. And the calculation of cost, by the time we shipped it all the way back to UK, was no more expensive than a reconstituted stone that we were buying from Marshalls. So what we did was then blended the two together. So in actual fact, the granite made the reconstituted stone look like granite.
Okay.
and that has stood the test of time. So that big for commercial. That was already mentioned, Lots Road, which is pretty spectacular.
And on the resi side?
On the resi side, well, I mean, how long have we got? I mean,
if you had to pick one.
No, I mean, I suppose that there's been so many moments. It's everything happens without most things always happen without you actually planning it. I mean, I went to a party in the south of France, and I arrived, and my hostess turned around and introduced me to a lovely lady who was Canadian, and she said, "Jackie, meet Randle, the world's greatest landscape designer." So I didn't deny it. I said, "Of course, yes, naturally." Where am I going with? And anyway, the party was a wedding. It was for 3 days, as one does, and I had great fun with them and the family, and they said, "Randle," you said, "if you're ever popping in through Montreal, come and see us." So it's not the kind of thing you do and sort of say, "Okay, well, I'll drop in next week or whatever." Anyway, 2 or 3 weeks later, a couple of months later, I then said, we were in July and then I went out September. I said, "I'm coming." And I said, "By the way, I want the red carpet treatment. I want everything you promised me."
Was that a planned trip, or did you think I'll just go and...
No, go as an adventure. Go and see.
Yeah.
Because I'd had many years ago, I had an opportunity to go and I didn't go.
Yeah.
I said, right, I got to go. And literally, I went up to this most amazing place in the middle of nowhere, just outside Quebec. And I only had met the wife before, and then I met the husband. Anyway, we sort of got into discussions about the gardens and what he'd been trying to do. And there was one little area which he said, "I've got a little problem area I'd like you to look at, Randle." So he said, "I'd happily pay you a fee to come back with your ideas." So I took pictures, went away, did my usual thing, thought about it, and then said, "Right, I know what I want to have. I want to have a huge urn at the very end." And it was quite a short space, but it needed something with a lot of structure because it was right next door to this Pavillon de Musique, which is a music house that they built. Anyway, sent my proposals in, and they said to me, "Yeah, Randle, we'll come back to you." And anyway, the message came back and said, "No, we're not. No, we don't think it's right." And I said, "I'm sorry, but as far as I'm concerned, that is the only solution." And then, how it be, and I get a call maybe a month later or something, and they said, "Randle, you're entirely right. And how soon can you get out here?"
Ah.
And that led to a project that took 4 years to complete.
Oh, wow.
Because of the winters there, you get literally 3-4 months of work time to do the work.
And then it's frozen.
And to give you a sort of scale of size, we ended up employing 37 gardeners.
Wow.
So it was big.
Wow.
It was big. And the client said to me, he said, "Randle, you can see that I'm not young. I'm in my years, but I want to see it whilst I'm alive."
Yes.
And I said to him, I know exactly what you want, and don't worry, I won't let you down.
Yeah.
And I think the nicest thing is, he was a very wealthy gentleman. And he said, when I'd finished it, and we did this parterre, and he said, "Randle," he said, "I cannot begin to thank you enough." He said, "What you've done for us and for my wife, you have created a vision of what her garden would be, and if it was like buying a Monet, this is what she loves about being. I don't have the Monet, I have got the real thing."
Wow.
So that was a nice, and they loved it, and they loved enjoying being in the space that they had.
Yeah.
So that, one, but I mean, there's so many. I mean, the one I've recently done, which I called River Dance, I mean, that was 2.5 years of my actual physical work.
Yes.
And the thing is, what's extraordinary about looking at it now, you think, well, it's always been there, hasn't it?
Mm.
And the fact that nature has allowed me to sort of play with it, change it. There was a 3-meter wide yew hedge, and I looked at the client and I said, "Well, there's 2 things we can do with this. Is either to cut it back, and if you cut it back, it's going to look dead ugly for 3 years, or we can go for the scorched earth policy and we just level everything." He said, "Randle, I think we probably want to go for the latter." And from what was going to be sort of like a a 1 year project turned into 2.5 years. But I mean, it's like it's probably, you know, where I've done anything in this country, that's probably my proudest, my best piece of,
Yes.
you know, investing 2 days, 3 days a week of my
Yeah.
time into it is
You get to know your clients very well over such long
And there's
projects.
also the important thing is having a client that can leave you to get on with it
Yeah, absolutely.
and believe in you being able to achieve it.
Very important. Thank you, Randle. I want to sort of move on to the end of the podcast where I love to kind of ask my guests what their top tips are. So, Randle, what are your top tips for clients who are about to embark on a new garden project?
Well, I've already mentioned is, you know, write it down as to what you want, what you are looking for to have in your garden. Don't go having a patchwork tapestry because that's very confusing. You're looking at too much all at the same time. And treat it like a painting. You know, that you have a painting always has a perspective. It has something happening in the background. In the foreground, you need to think through, you know, structure of architectural plants. Background, you need something that's green, preferably evergreen, because when you're in winter, when you're looking through it, and your structure planting might well be deciduous, so its foliage drops off, you still have the beauty of that architectural plant there because its backdrop is giving you that element of the three-dimensional. I mean, things like Bachelor nigra, which has this amazing pink bark on it. I mean, you know, or even just normal birch trees, you know, they have that wonderful white bark. You know, they themselves give a nice colour throughout it. You know, ornamental grasses and things, which we've now managed to, you know, have a huge variety of. So, top tips, think about structure, think about what planting is. Don't overcomplicate the planting. You know, it's rather like having a food you like. You know, you don't have possibly 10 things that you like. You probably have 5 of which, you know, those are, you know, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to go for if I had a choice to go out in the evening or cook at home. So think of planting like that, so you get maximum enjoyment out of the plants you really love. You know, don't, you know, if your aspirations are greater than your budget, then think of phasing it, which is very easy when you're building a garden. That, you know, you can put duct work in under areas. So, you know, if it means you can't afford the electrical lighting at that moment in time, or the irrigation, which is pretty critical, then, you know, future-proof it. Which will help people think it through as well. Oh, I can't afford that, and I can't do it. Well, if you can't afford it now, future-proof it so you can afford it. You know, if you're going to have your barbecue area and you want to get gas to it, or future-proof that. You know, so you've still got, you know, once you've built the whole thing, it's too late. It's too late to start digging it all up and doing it again. So think that process through. Think again. You know, study. You know, where's the sunrise? Where's it set? Think of your soil. What type of soil do you have? You know, alkaline, acidic. You know, the type of plants you're going to put in it. Or if you want to play like I do sometimes and say, "Randy, you can't plant camellias there because it's all chalk." I said, "Don't worry, we'll find a solution." But yeah, it's thinking those things through, which is critical. As to, you know, what people ask me, Randall, what's the most sort of fashionable thing at this present moment, and in what's happening in the world or in the garden world, I don't know. I mean, my thing I love doing at the present moment is building log walls, but that's completely a different subject. And it's, you know, if you happen to have a lot of wood, you need a lot of wood to build a log wall. Doing things like that, creating habitats. I mean, everybody loves the word rewilding. My advice to anybody thinking about rewilding is make sure that you understand what it means. Because rewilding is not a hobby; it's a long lifetime. You know, you don't want to just go and, oh, I'll do that, and then, you know, 3 years' time you're bored. Because looking after wildflowers is a process of making sure that there's not a predominant species that takes over. Because if you allow a predominant species to take over, you've lost it. Because then you've got to literally start all over again. So, you know, a lovely thing to do, and it's great for,
Made famous by Jeremy Clarkson. That's great advice. Thank you. And my last question, top tip, what advice would you give to somebody wanting to start out in this industry?
Well, I've been very fortunate to have employed in my 47 years, 48 years, amazing people who've all gone off and started up their own businesses. And I mean, I always say, I think I'm going to walk in one day and find there's nobody in my office. I always encourage people to go and run their own businesses. I think it's very important. But getting into the business, there is one word that I'd use, or 2 words: be passionate. If you're not passionate about it, don't do it. You have to have, like I have had and still have, total passion for what I'm doing. I breathe it, I sleep it, I dream it. You've got to have that. Because you haven't got it, then I think you're deceiving yourself as to what you actually want to do. And, the great thing is, I know there's some jobs that, are far less rewarding, but, try and make it. I explained to somebody who came to work for me, and he was virtually penniless. Well, he was penniless. He could hardly afford to, feed himself, let alone his young child. And I said to him, he was getting like, why am I? He was working with me. Why am I raking this out when I think it's okay as it is? And I said to Mark, because he's artistic, he plays music. I said, Mark, think of it like you're going to be painting something, or you're going to compose, or you're reading some music or whatever. And you want that surface to look absolutely amazing. It's like painting a canvas. I said, rake it and level it and take ownership of it. And he looked at me and completely, at the end of the day, and he came back to me and he said, I understand now. And from somebody who didn't have a job, had no career, he's now still working for me 3 years later, and he's risen up in the ranks. And it's those opportunities of having time to explain to people, which is the most important thing. I go back to my early years of dyslexia. Had somebody actually taken the time and found ways and means to teach me how to spell and to read and to do my mathematical tables, my problems would have gone. I was like my son William, my eldest son. I knew at a very early age he had a problem. He had this dyslexia, and we knew how to deal with it because I just didn't want him to go through what I went through. Touch typing and things like that are very, very, very important things. So, it started my profession. Started by starting at the bottom. I never ever stop. If there's a job to be done, I don't care whether it's sweeping or whether it's digging or whatever else. I'm in there doing the guides. If they're doing the digging, and I might be doing the sweeping. I need a balance of hierarchy. I get my hands dirty. I never ask anybody to do anything I wouldn't do myself, which is really important. But to get into the business, you've got to be passionate. You've got to really understand there are moments in time, particularly recently, where you are going to get absolutely drenched and you are going to go home totally disheartened. And then you're going to come back the next day and suddenly say, oh no, not more of the same. But the rewards are for them when they see what they have achieved. And that's what's the best thing about our industry. It is, by some long stretch, this year has been horrible. Horrible. Everybody talks about how warm it's been. However warm you think it is, it ain't warm when you've just got soaking wet. And everybody has overalls and everything that they need to have, but it's still, you feel damn, this wonderful country we have. It does give you that feeling of damn. So have the passion, have the drive. If you're going to do it, and also drawing. I mean, if somebody came in with a portfolio once, I always used to interview. I think the most interesting thing when I did do interviewing, I was in the good days when people had to handwrite their CVs. I could tell a lot from their handwriting, a lot. And again, strange enough, I can always spot a spelling mistake. which is weird.
Amazing.
A weird. I know that was, but always double check. You know, if you're making an effort, you're going to write a letter.
Yeah.
Write it and make sure that it's word perfect. And I, could tell so much for handwriting, because neat handwriting, which you wouldn't do if you got a letter from me. You suddenly thought, "What is this scrawl?" But those type of things, and always their notebooks. I say, "Bring me a notebook. I want to see what their doodles are.
Yeah.
I want to see what they're doing." And I also say, "Bring me your sketchbook," and then they don't turn up with their sketchbook nor their notebook, and I end the interview there and then.
Yeah.
I simply say items that I requested that I can then understand what you're all about, whether you are that passionate person that I want to employ.
Yeah.
So it's
Great
important.
tips.
Never ever I think, I can't. It's always thinking that people think I can't draw. I don't care. I want to see how you draw what you draw, and if you can explain and talk me through it, that's what's important for me.
Brilliant tips, Randle. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on to the Finding Perfect Property podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today and hear all about your fascinating career and top tips. It's been really interesting, and that now brings us to the end of this month's episode of Finding Perfect Property, Diary of a Buying Agent. Thank you to Randle for joining me today and sharing his valuable insights. For more information about how to purchase property in prime central London or the countryside, please get in touch via our website, and don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever podcast channel you use to listen. See you next time.